Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to Supercar Talk. Today, we are in a Mercedes AMG GT S. And the reason why we're in this car, if you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen that, unfortunately, a week ago, the Ferrari 458 was in a bit of an accident. Nothing too major, but as it was driving past a parked car, somebody decided to open up their door and it smashed our wing mirror. In the meantime, they have kindly given us a Mercedes AMG GT S, so it gives us the opportunity to go for a test drive. It's got a really nice sound to it, really nice sound. But that being said, I have been for a drive in this already, and I must say the idling is louder than when you're actually driving. So that's not great. That's first con number one. But what I would say is, if you were to straight pipe this, or just at least put an aftermarket exhaust on it, this thing, I mean, I don't know if you can hear that, but this thing would sound like an absolute animal. At idle, it already does, and it has a really nice rev to it as well. As soon as you lift off the gas, it crackles and pops, which is great. It's like the Huracan. The Lamborghini Huracan does that as well. But it's just too quiet. But first impressions are, it's an exciting car to drive, and certainly a good contender for the replacement of the GTR. Not that that's coming just yet, but it's certainly something that I'm considering. There are 5 different modes on this car, depending on how you want to drive and depending on the conditions. First one is comfort mode, and as you can hear, I've just come from race mode into comfort mode, and I'm sure you could probably hear that. I hope you could anyway. The valves close straight away, the suspension softens, and the throttle isn't as responsive. So that's if you want to drive in comfort mode. I don't know how many people would drive in that mode because it must be pretty boring. I haven't actually driven in it yet. The next is sport. And sport, as you can imagine, it slightly stiffens the suspension up, a bit more throttle response. The valves are still closed though. The next is Sport Plus, and the valves have just opened up. The suspension has gone into the stiffest mode, and the throttle response is, I think, at its most responsive. And the final mode is race mode. Race mode is still stiffest suspension, best throttle response, but I believe that traction control is pretty much off. And in a car like this with a 4-litre engine twin turbo, the power being put down on those wheels is quite a lot, so it's very tail happy. AMGs have always been known for being tail happy, so it's certainly used with caution. So let's get going. So I've got it in manual mode, race mode. You can have it in automatic, even in race mode, but what's the point of that? You want to control your gears. Oh, that sound. Every downshift as well, as long as you get it right, you get a nice backfire, nice crackle and pop, which is awesome. Oh. That sound is just awesome. Did you feel that? Barely any throttle and it just kicks out like that. I literally just drifted it around into the corner. And it's not even that wet. It's really not even that wet. It's too quiet. I'm in second gear at the moment. I'm going to put my foot down and let's see if the camera picks this up. Does sound good, but could be louder. It's a really exciting car to drive. It's certainly got the speed. The handling, I'm not quite sure yet. I must say though, one thing that I have noticed already is the steering on this is very, very light. It doesn't give you much feedback from the road. Unlike the GTR, I would suggest that the GTR has the most feedback from the road, and you actually start getting into like a go-kart sort of feel. And then you go to the 458, which is in between this and the GTR, and I'd say that's probably the best sort of feedback that you want. You can feel the road, but it's not tearing your hands around whenever you go over a bump or whenever you're trying to turn. So yeah, I think this is a bit too light, and I haven't noticed that it stiffens up at all depending on the mode that you're in. I mean, we're in race mode right now and it still feels too light. I'm getting no feedback from the road. Is this a driver's car? I'm not sure. It's got the sound, it's got the handling, it's got the speed, but it's this lack of response that I get from the steering wheel that really makes me unsure as to whether it is or not. Obviously it's got the twin turbo now as well, which the SLS didn't have. It was a naturally aspirated, I think it was a 6.3 litre engine, or it may even be bigger. Don't hold me to that, but I'm not sure if this is a real driver's car. The real downside for me is this steering, the lack of response. There's also a nice little button here as well that can change your exhaust from the valves open to the valves closed. And of course, I do have the valves open, and it's still not loud enough. Let's try it with the valves closed and see what difference there is. Valves closed now. It's like driving a Prius. So we've got the valves closed, we're in first gear. No. Let's get these back open. Oh, that's more like it. That's a great sound though, when you're gunning it. Now, its looks, I think they're a bit like Marmite. There are a lot of people out there that love the look of this car. I'm one of them. However, I know that there are some people out there that hate it. It's certainly eye-catching, and having driven this around town, you get a lot of people turning around to have a look at it. I don't think they're quite sure what it is. I think it's the rarity. And combined with the looks of it, I love it. The back is a bit squat, as with the SLS, and the front of it is very, very long, so you've got to be careful when you're turning, just like back there as well. I was coming out of a very tight corner, there was a wall all the way to the edge, and I could not see, so the first thing that they're going to hit is this big front, the big nose on this. But no, I love it, and it's, you drive this and then you drive the GTR. Don't get me wrong, the GTR gets some looks, but nothing in comparison to the amount of looks that this gets. So yeah, it's certainly eye-catching. The interior, I think it's amazing. It's like being in a spaceship. You've got quite a lot of buttons, but I just love the way that they've designed it. And you've got a nice little trackpad here that you can scroll through the radio selection and the sat nav and things like that. So that's pretty cool. Where this gear selector is, it's not greatly positioned. I actually knocked that earlier when I was turning. So yeah, you've got to be careful with your elbow. It doesn't actually change the gear because you're moving, but if you put it into neutral, like this, by accident of course, as you're turning, then you're not going to have any power to get around the rest of the corner. But yeah, apart from that, it's pretty spectacular, and it's great fun to drive. Takes the bends really well. Now it does 0 to 60 in about 3.8 seconds, so it's certainly no slug. But its handling is very good, and I always used to read that the SLS's handling was never that great, but they've really improved the handling on this, and I don't know if that's at the expense of the steering and the lack of feedback that the steering gives you, but they've done a great job on it. I just wish there was a bit more feedback from this steering wheel, I really do. That being said, I want one. So we'll slow it right down. This is the same place we did the GTR launch control. Let's see how we go. Back's going out already. I didn't even put the pedal to the floor and the back was going out. You need to get straight out of that first gear because it's just too much power to put down. I would say the conditions are wet, actually more greasy than wet, but no, it doesn't put it down that well. Certainly not in comparison to the GTR. But then I guess maybe I'm a bit spoiled with that. 4-wheel drive, it just, even in wet conditions, it just goes. I would say this in comparison to the 458 in the wet, the 458 can put it down better, but having said that, when I took it out to London the other day, and it was pretty wet conditions, even that, it can get a bit tail happy. And I think that's probably just because it's rear wheel drive, but obviously in the dry, it handles like a dream, of course. So, to sum it up, this is a great car, and if you're in the market for a £120,000 car, well, you could look at potentially a Porsche GT3. Would I have this over a Porsche GT3? Probably not. I'd probably need another 10 grand to get a decent example of one. But no, I would go for the Porsche GT3. However, that being said, you can now pick these up for about 110,000. And at that level, okay, you could look at an R8 Spider V10. I don't know which I'd have over that or this. I think it would probably be this, simply because there's not many of these on the road. It's a really good car. So that's it for this week's episode of Supercar Talk. I've certainly enjoyed testing this car out. It's been great that we've had such a different car to drive. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for next week's video. Thanks a lot.